taking a week or so off. Hope everybody had a good Thanksgiving. We just got back. We're kind of ready to hit the ground running for the last like 2 weeks, 2, 3 weeks of like full weeks of December. So today we have our lead developer, Lu Chen, who's coming all the way from Montreal, Canada, and excited to have him on here. He's going to be talking about how we do our automated test workflow using some AI bots. And I'm going to turn it over to him, and then we may do some follow up questions. But he's got a little presentation to work through, and yeah, I'm excited to hear about it. So over to you, Lucian.
Hey, what's up, guys? So I was developing this. This is gonna be a very like technical. Like we're gonna go pretty deep in this. So I was developing this AI chatbot for a client, and they have like fairly complex workflow. We use like RAG. We have like an ingestion pipeline for their documents, and then they're able to ask questions about their documents. So developing like the prompts and the whole like AI agent, the whole flow was like we would have to like manually test it. So that was a bit tedious. And I was thinking of we have like our like tried and true API test like framework and like our whole way of doing things. So I was thinking, how can I reuse the lessons learned from it to put in place like a testing approach for AI chatbots and save myself some time and headache and not have to do as much like manual flow. So this is more like a backend oriented presentation. So let's go through it. So why this was hard? Like it's really about like reducing friction and removing as much like manual testing as we can. So it's quite complex to like upload like files, and we'd have to think in advance of how to like which cases we want to test for. Like some documents are hard to read, or maybe they contain irrelevant info. So thinking in advance of like kind of this setup for each test case, um, and having to do over and over and kind of keeping it in working memory is a bit um, time consuming. And then long feedback loop, like all of the manual steps that would have to take. And then every time that we like test manually, we might miss edge cases and not go through all of the cases. So we might kind of break something when we modify the prompt or something like that. And the LLM responses vary. So sometimes you're not really sure, like, is this a good response? So this is kind of the challenges going into it. And like how our feature works, I kind of gave you an overview. Users, they upload some medical documents, like a doctor visit, like doctor notes or things like that. And then we have like another user that asks questions about their documents. Maybe they want to get like, I don't know, a quick overview of like the most severe conditions or something like that. And then the LLM reads files content and answers queries. So our backend has like tool calling and connections. So we had like some chatbots that they're just about like taking an input and then doing an action on it. But this, since it has like a more complex flow, that also goes into like consideration, like how we're gonna test this. And we have like a capability here, like file selection, that a user can like choose specific files to ask questions about. That's kind of like a like special feature that we're going to be testing in our backend. And so in our normal API tests, we try to get as close as we can to like the real behavior. So we use like a real database, but it's like a separate database. It's like a test database that gets wiped in between each run, but it's a real database. So if we write like bad SQL queries, then we're going to catch that in our test database, which you wouldn't get if you would mock. Like in some teams, in some approaches, they do that. So the thing is about being pragmatic about like what we're going to mock and what we're going to let um, let be like the real backend behavior. So we I already put in place like a test for the data ingestion pipeline. So I already know that it's like writing to the database in a specific table, like the file content. It takes um, certain like PDF files and then parses them. And for each page, it takes the page content and that becomes like a row in the database, and then another row for the next page, etc. So the ingestion piece is already tested, so there's no need to like include it to be like kind of end to end. We're gonna go with a starting point that like the database is already pre-populated with file contents, and we have control over what files and what's their content, so that way we can start designing test cases. Um, then we make real API calls through the controller, so we actually let it call OpenAI, and then we capture the LLM responses, and then we put it in a structured file so that we can review each test case, like what was the setup, the scenario, and then what was the actual response. So in the setup, like the files that we start off with in the knowledge base, we kind of hard code this. And so we started with like hard coding two. So simulate as if they already went through the ingestion pipeline. We have full control over the contents. And then if we want, we can push it further, but I'm just going to show you like a basic one. In our case, like we're adding two files, and then we choose to ask a question about only one file. And then we assert that the second file is not included in the response, so that the tool calling and like everything internally is hooked up properly. And that way we get the maximum confidence that our API is working properly. So to make this real API call, we actually call the like chat controller kind of manually, and it goes through the real logic. It calls the LLM with the real file contents, and so it's kind of like the complete flow for that, like the chat API. And then once we get that back, we just like create like a markdown file that says like what it was, the expected behavior, like the second file content shouldn't be there, the first file content should be there, the actual response that we got from the LLM, like the real OpenAI call, and then what we can check for manually. And so this makes us like way faster to test, and we can add like other cases with full control and confidence that like our API is working properly. And we can like repeat it as much as we want. Like when we tweak prompts, we can see the effect almost in real time, and is the real behavior, and it's like real readable. To me, what's important in writing tests is that it's like readable, kind of like plain English, like a story. We started off with two medical files, and we chose to read one, and then we got this output, and then we can evaluate if it makes sense. So file selection feature, kind of went already through this. Current state, so we have like multiple test scenarios. And another thing that I didn't put in the slides is that we actually skip this from continuous integration, because since this test makes like a real API call, it's going to be slower. And sometimes it could be also flaky, and it might like require manual review. So it doesn't really make sense to put in continuous integration. This is for now, our setup is if you're working in the chatbot API, you're going to be running it manually. You choose to like turn it on and run it manually every time. But it doesn't make sense to put it in CI right now. There could be a separate setup for that. And this next step, I tweak with this, but like have another LLM to like read the output and like expect it in actual, and tell us like if it passed or failed. I kind of play with this a little bit. It's a bit flaky sometimes. There's some prompt engineering to do, but that can be like a bit of a time saver. Um, so when to use this, it's good for like um, when the API is like pretty simple. It has just like one case, then it's okay to like test it manually. But almost like you're almost never gonna be in that kind of situation. So I would say it's almost always like worth it to write tests because you're saving yourself so much effort and you're getting more confidence about the stability of what you're building. Features where you need many test scenarios. So faster iteration is really the key here, and confidence by using like a realistic case. Simple MPI influence. UI specific. There's I'm not really touching like front end tests in this presentation. This is just back end. So, but we have like another way of testing, which I won't go into right now. So let me go in the test here. I'll show you the code. So here we have the controller. So here we have like the database, like a helper for the real database that gets like wiped. This is where we do the wiping of the database. And then in here, like we set up the user with their like case and like a chat, like an empty chat history. And then we create like the file. So notice already it just kind of reads as a like plain English like story. We create a user, we create a PTSD file for them, we create a file about chronic pain, and then we're asking what are the current treatment approaches, and then we're like mocking this, and then we select just the PTSD file, and then we call the controller, the API endpoint. And then we get the chat message. This is just to like unwrap the response or like get him from the database because we save the chat history. So we save like the messages that was responded with, and then we write like, okay, what was the setup about? What is this test about? We have like these files, and then we selected this file. We have this query, and then the expected behavior. It should only be about the PTSD file and not about like chronic pain. And then just a utility like a helper to write to a file. And then I created this just to play around with this, but this is like the second LLM call to like validate. So we have, let me just run it as a demo. So it goes ahead, it makes the call here, takes like 5 seconds. And then here I'll kind of not scroll. We're getting a bit of a spoiler, it fails. So test result is written here. Let me go in like preview mode. So this is what, like, if you're gonna do manual review, this is kind of what it looks like. You can just open it after each run and then see, okay, you get like a refresher in case you weren't reading the code. So we have this is the setup, and then we expect this, and we should not see like knee pain, and then we can review what the chat is actually going to be responding. So the treatment, we have some medicine, cognitive therapy, PTSD, nightmares, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not seeing anything neat. And we see the source. That's great. So it seems like it's passing. So my setup like saved me a bunch of time of like not having to do this through the UI and getting a really controlled experience. And this, I went with the test result file. No, that's not one. Validate response content. So this makes like another like LLM call. You validate test results, analyze the markdown report, and then it should mention items, should not mention, check if these topics are absent. And it's a bit flaky, like it tells us some things. So it's not perfect. Some prompt engineering has to be done here. So I say it's good enough for now, but we'll keep like incrementing on it. But right now it saves a lot of time, and the kind of foundation, the framework is set up for us to add like more scenarios, because we could have like adding like different data sources to the rag, like not only from um, like documents, uploaded medical documents. You can also ask questions through from like call transcripts. Maybe like the medical provider did a call with the client and that was like transcribed, and we want to ask questions about that as well. So that would be very easy to add from here. And from here, like tests are readable. So the main points is that it's going to increase your like feedback loop. Keep as much as you can not mocked, so that way it gives you confidence that everything internally is hooked up together properly and that your prompts are doing what they should. And make it as readable as you can, like kind of like a plain English story, more or less, as much as possible. So that's it for me. If you guys
Nice.
have like questions from the team or anything like that, I'll be
Yeah,
welcome.
that's great. Thanks for sharing that. So this is, I know we did something kind of similar to this as well. Sorry, yeah. When you were running the test, like we did something where we were essentially scraping even the JPEGs of these documents that weren't readable. It's like another test. I
Yeah.
remember between you and I, we created like a test suite because we were basically having the same job, or the same tool call would go off and like process lots of different types of files. So what you could do is we wrote like multiple tests, and then gave it basically use this prompt, but run it against these 5 different files. That way you could just tweak the prompt in one place, and then you could kind of run it again against all 5 different scenarios. I think is that similar in some ways what you're talking about here? Because I think we did something similar to that.
Yeah, what you're talking about is like on the ingestion piece, and we had like a really nice setup there. Even we had like a kind of reporting dashboard like that showed a preview of the page, like that was it's kind of like a picture of the page, and like the doctor had some handwriting and whatever, and you could see like the preview and the output of the doc ingestion. That was quite good, and we even like leveraged AI to like build that like simple reporting dashboard. That was a really good setup on the ingestion. I don't know if I would want to like kind of find it again, like kind of parse through the code to try to find it. I didn't prepare like a presentation
That's
about
fine.
that piece, but that was a really good setup as well, because we had just in one, like you could just scroll the page and see like the multiple different cases, like multiple different, like a page is like blank, or it has illegible handwriting, or another one that has like legible handwriting, one that had like forms filled out. So we had all of these just kind of lined up, and we were seeing like when we tweak the prompt to parse these pages, then how the doc ingestion pipeline would work. And it worked really well.
Nice. Yeah, I think this is helpful when you're uh, the typical scenario is like we have a client who is using ChatGPT on their own, right? They're just going to chatgpt.com and they're like throwing in a few files and they're just like asking questions against it. And so now when you try to bring that to like a company, um, it makes it more complicated because you're trying to standardize a lot of things. So we have to, that's where the RAG piece comes in. So this has been a helpful tool, I know, for you, because you can quickly get lost in sort of an infinite amount of like variables here because you're working with like natural language versus like a very digital, like either it's true or false, like this kind of natural language responses. So having this type of thing, I think is helpful because I think if I understood your demo there, like you were running the test, it was coming back response, and then you were even having it validate, like use the response that was coming back, and then you're using AI to kind of interpret that. Is that what's happening?
Yes. Like I
Yeah.
said, that piece is like a little bit flaky, and I wouldn't like trust it 100% yet until I iterate more and like,
Still AI. You wouldn't want
yeah.
to trust it.
So like what we had in the ingestion pipeline is probably the best trade-off, that you see like all the cases in one line and like all the outputs, and then you can just give it like thumbs up. um, that's kind of like a emerging like pattern that I was reading recently. They called evals and data sets. There's a bunch of like good documentation online about it. But yeah, that's the main idea. Like you set up your kind of scenarios, your expected and your actual, and then you just kind of like eyeball them quickly and see like, okay, yeah, each one of them is good, or some of them are not good, and then you go back and tweak. So yeah, like just not having like so many variables and being like kind of spread thin and holding all the kind of working context in your mind, it's really good for that.
Nice. That's good. Yeah. If you guys, Ira, I know Keith just joined, Leon, Janata, if you guys have any questions, let me know in the chat. I can bring you on. We can just chat. I think this is kind of casual. Um, I know we're doing a couple implementations like this on some other projects, but yeah, if you guys have questions for Lucian, just let me know. I just need to bring you on here. Let me, here we go. Yeah, it's speaking. Awesome. Yeah, thanks for putting that together. And let me just mute everybody real quick. Um, so, yeah, do you guys have any thoughts? I know some of you guys joined halfway through, so that probably made no sense halfway through. Any other thoughts, questions? I know Ira, you've been doing a lot with the cases, this same client. I don't know if you've touched any of these AI automated tests yet.
No, not yet, but this was some really good context for me.
Sweet.
Yeah, that's true. I really liked your approach. Like, I was even like you mentioned evals. I was reading about it, and like I think the whole way you are thinking about testing, it's more or less like how they suggest that we test it. So I think it's very very interesting. I'm curious to use it in the Hextech project for the chat part that we have. It's a kind of a bit forgotten because we haven't touched it for in some time. But I think once we have some time to get back at it, I will for sure want to try some of it, because that's a very core problem of working with LLMs. Like it can be like very inconsistent, and like for instance, when you want to give an, in our case, for instance, we have the ability to kind of do estimates. So we do a budget for the customer. Like we can't make calculations wrong. Like it can't be wrong on this part, and we need for it to be consistent. So I really like the overall approach in general. I'm curious to test it.
Nice.
Yeah, it really shines when you have like tool calling. So let's
Yeah.
say like you kind of pre-load the database with like your financial reports, and then you like prompt it like, hey, like calculate this. And there's like no other way that it could possibly know except for making the tool calls. So you're set up for testing that.
There's so
Perfect.
much we could talk about as far as the RAG stuff goes. So this is like just totally like an intro to it. But yeah, Greg, what you got?
Hey, I joined halfway through. Sorry. There are people doing stuff like this, even what I call it, Lucian. There's a local startup here where I'm at called Ordinal, and their whole thing is bringing all the city documentation, all the different volumes and volumes of ordinances and all that stuff, and basically sort of digitizing that, and then having an LLM go through it and send it back to the LLM again in a lot, and be like, is this right? Are you sure it's right? Where is this at? If you don't know, say you don't know. So I think it's definitely one of the interesting use cases to get something from the LLM and then send it back to the same one or a different one and go, okay, what do you think? This is what I wanted. Did you give it to me or not? And I'm like, oh yeah, no, sorry. So it was good.
And
You're
that's
absolutely right.
and that's a great point. Kind of brings me like, because you can use this approach like on the ingestion pipeline as well as on the chat side. And I was reading about like different patterns, like you're mentioning. It's kind of like chaining, like you read it and then you pass it to another step, like the output is like, oh, review this, does it make sense? And what's really cool also is that you can use this approach for like testing just intermediate steps, still making the real response. But if you're gonna write like fewer tests, I would say just like the full, like the whole end-to-end thing is a good starting point.
And that's good as well, because I think when you're also developing with AI, it's very collaborative with the clients. Like it's kind of like you're working with this like um, uh, this other third party, which is the AI. So we're trying to like train it, and then they'll go and use it a bunch of times. So when they come back and say, "Hey, I'm getting when I ask this question, like I always get this." So that would be a good point to like, okay, let's add that to the test and then make sure that it tests against that. I think that's kind of the workflow. Is that what you're thinking, Lucien? It's like kind of
Yeah, and it's
incorporating.
it's almost like you don't even invent any. It's almost like you just take like the client's words and that becomes the test. You're just asking them like, hey, how are you using it today? And they'll show you a few examples. That's when you paid like the most attention, and then you just like kind of forward that, and they become like test cases. And it, like, kind of next level is putting in place kind of client driven or like user driven evals, like in Claude or in like an OpenAI. Like in the normal chat there's like a thumbs up, thumbs down when you get a response, and you can give like feedback. So I'm sure you can use these to like drive up like your test further, like, oh, we didn't catch this kind of edge case. So that can be a valuable data point.
Could you set it up in a way and motivate them to use your own client rather than just going straight to ChatGPT, and then you can actually capture the input and see what they did wrong?
Yeah, I mean, like, since we're building like they're custom, so we have like full control. And I'm thinking like some users, in some scenarios, like we know in advance, like some users are like kind of like the power users, so their feedback is disproportionately impactful. So we can even kind of put, like, if you will, like user feature flags, like the feedback mechanism is only shown to some users, and normally like they would use the thumbs up, thumbs down only when something gets wrong. So you're sure to get like kind of the good quality data.
Cool.
Very cool. Anything else? We can still hang out and chat, but just related to that, that's good.